current state of the property market. There have been a number of changes to the rental system that have been introduced by the government in the past week. And so I want to talk about, first of all, what it means for the market, what we're going through, and then I'm going to talk about just the general market itself, what the kind of perception is out there. There's a lot of people starting to get a little bit nervous about it. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then what we're also going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about just if there was a change in the market, if it was to kind of collapse or anything like that, like what can you do? Is there things to do? Can you take advantage of that? If you're caught and you're in a bad position, what can you do about that? I got caught 2008 quite badly, so I'm going to be talking about that as well. So guys, welcome. It's nice to see you. What I'm calling this particular video is, are we heading for another crash? Because it is kind of, there's a weird sense out there at the moment. There are record prices being paid for by properties, and at the same time, there's an awful lot of uncertainty. So I just was with my mastermind members about 30 minutes ago, and when we were speaking, one of them brought up the fact that a house has just sold in Salt Hill in Galway, and the guide price for this house was 350,000, and it just sold for 620,000. So from 350 to 620, the end sale price, absolutely, crazy. And you might kind of think to yourself, oh, that must have been just two nut jobs like bidding against one another. But apparently there was multiple bidders right up to about 600,000. So it just seems absolutely mad. And when you see that kind of thing happen, you start thinking back, and I look back to around about 2006 and 2007, when similar things were happening in the Irish market. And I can remember I was buying on a frequent basis. I was doing really well. And then all of a sudden it started to get to the point where, hold on a sec, I have the sound. There we go, that's a bit better. It got to the point where suddenly the market was in a really bad way. I mean, you couldn't find value anywhere. And I was actually putting together a fund at the time. And I can remember we were raising a certain amount of, tall Americano, no problem. I was raising money with a group of investors. And I think we were targeting a raise of about 30 million. And the guys I was working with, it was their jobs to bring the money together. It was my job to bring the deals, the property deals into the fund. And so I went out there and started looking for deals. And I was looking with basically 30 million in my pocket. And so I had loads and loads of money. Money wasn't an issue. And this 30 million was going to go into a fund. And it was going to be easy to raise the money. That was the general sort of view at the time when we started this fund. And I started going out there looking for deals, and I could not find anything that made any sense. Every time we looked at something, the price of purchase was so high that it just seemed kind of a little bit crazy. It seemed like, God, if we buy this, are we going to actually make any money on it? It didn't seem like we were going to make any money on it. And so this was the first kind of sign of it becoming kind of difficult out there. Now, guys, if you have questions, throw them into the chat there. As always, I'm running this mainly on YouTube here, but then I've also got TikTok and I've got Instagram. So I'm going to take your questions after, but I just want to cover the topic that we're covering and just about where the market is at the moment. Now, we have, going back to 2007, I can remember thinking, I can't find value anywhere. And that being the case, maybe I should look abroad. Now, that was the mistake that I made. You go and look abroad and you arrive. I flew down to Spain. I was looking in Bulgaria. I was looking in the Czech Republic. And when you arrive in those places, you fly in and you're coming from a place where they're paying huge money for small, pokey kind of homes and houses and, townhouses and apartments and stuff. And suddenly you're in this different, jurisdiction, completely different location. In Spain, like the south of Spain, they do beautiful big apartments. They're not as small as you'd be used to here in the capital city. And I can remember going down and seeing an apartment, and it was this huge, spacious apartment. And I remember looking, going, "Whoa, this is really great value." Comparatively, it was like I was getting a big 2-bedroom apartment, loads of space, a garden out the front with a swimming pool that was my personal swimming pool. I mean, I remember just thinking, this is amazing. You would not get anything like this back home. And so, sure enough, I went ahead and I bought it. Now, what I didn't realize at the time, it looked like tremendous value compared to Dublin. But what I had done was I had paid probably the top price that had ever been achieved in that local area in Spain. And so I was the idiot. And that's what often happens is you go off in search of property value elsewhere, but you go in there very, very green and you really have no clue what are the comparables. And so you end up overpaying because comparatively to your home market, it looks like good value. Anyway, that's what I just caution you guys that are out there that are thinking that, wow, the prices are just mad at the moment, like better off looking abroad. You would just have to wonder about that. I spoke to a guy this morning based in the north of Ireland, and he was saying that he thought that things looked a little bit shaky, and he was wondering whether it was time to exit the market and maybe sort of stockpile a bit of cash and just get ready to be able to purchase if prices were to fall. Now, how realistic is that? If you actually take a look at it from the perspective of the world economy compared to, say, the national situation, the national situation is that we have a population that needs housing. We have way too many people demanding housing and not enough houses being built. So from that point of view, yes, prices will continue to go up. And that's my strong opinion because I just don't see them fixing. And we're going to talk about the changes made to the rent caps and stuff in a few minutes. But we also have to take the overall global sort of economic overview. And the reality is that Donald Trump is a very, very unpredictable guy sitting in the White House. Like a week ago, he was saying that there would be no invasion or no, missiles fired into Iran, that he wanted to make a deal. Now, all of a sudden, he sees that, it looks real macho to go and launch missiles and start kind of like, flexing your muscles. And all of a sudden, it looks like maybe there will actually be a war. And that creates a huge amount of economic uncertainty around the world. Investors tend to run for the hills whenever there is war or anything like that. Now, it's bad enough that we have Ukraine and Russia battling it out for the last couple of years, but now we're also looking at, Israel and Iran in a battle, and you've also got all of the refugees that left Syria and that left Gaza, all making their way into Europe. You've got now this issue happening in Iran and stuff. It's destabilizing. And so you have to wonder, what's this going to do? Now, what it could do is it could push down interest rates. So from that perspective, it might be a good thing if you've got a lot of borrowings and you're wondering, what's going to happen to your borrowings. Are they going to go up or are they going to go down? You'll still have the same amount, but your interest may fall. That may happen in Europe because Europe is struggling economically at the moment. And so the ECB, the European Central Bank, they keep on reducing rates, which is a good thing. In the US, the Fed, the Federal Reserve, they are not satisfied that inflation is under control. And so they're keeping interest rates higher. Donald Trump doesn't like that. And he's making all sorts of threats that he's going to remove the Fed chairman and stuff. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But this is kind of a destabilizing kind of a time frame. Now, if I take the viewpoint in the immediate Irish market right now, in the last week, they've suddenly introduced a load of new changes to the rental system. We have the rent pressure zones for about the last 10 years, the RPZ, and that meant that there was, you had a restriction on the amount that you could increase the rent in your house. And it didn't matter, what the situation was. The only way you could reset your rent to the market rate was to leave it empty for 2 years or to do a substantial refurbishment on it. or to upgrade the energy performance of the property. And if you did that, then you were allowed to reset. But it involved a substantial investment, either financial investment or take it off the market so there is no investment coming in, no income coming in. What happened after that is now you've got a situation where there was a lot of landlords leaving the market. They were very, very unhappy with the situation because, and I know this situation very closely because I rented a property for 6 years. I was in the Blackrock area in Dublin. When the first year I moved in, my rent was set at 2,250, which was probably high enough at the time. I don't know, but the landlord and I, we got along very, very well, and they were very good to me. They did not increase my rent once in 6 years. Now, what that meant for me was that I just had this nice stable rent for 6 years, no issue at all. But for the landlord would have been entitled to increase the rent only by 2% a year. And when I left, the landlord is entitled to do a catch up of those 2% that they didn't increase for those 6 years. And that would bring the total rent to 2,534, something like that. Now, 2,534, that's a €284 difference per month increase in rent. Think about that now. You've 6 years of renting property to somebody, and your rent in that 6-year period has only gone up €284. So that is one of the big issues, because in that time frame, rents went much, much higher than that, because during COVID, rents shot up quite substantially. And I would say that rents in that area where I was living, where the landlord, after I moved out, was entitled to put it up to 2,500, the rent in that area would be 3,500. And so it just shows that the landlord is losing out on about 1,000 a month, 12 grand a year. And so what does that do? That incentivizes the landlord to just get out of the market. So to say, you know what, I'm going to go and sell the property. There'll be some family will be mad keen to go and buy this house. So they'll buy it and I'll get a good price and I'll just sell it. And that's what a lot of people were doing. So the government decided, okay, well, we have to go and stop this now, because the reality is something like 130,000 homes across the country are rented by small landlords. That's landlords that are only between 1 and 2 properties to their name. You're not talking about big funds here. The big funds only represent about 6% of the market. The small 1 and 2 property landlords, they represent about 86% of the market. So it makes a big difference. So the small guy, and this could be, a carpenter or an electrician, it could be a nurse, whatever, people that bought property as a kind of retirement plan, not property moguls that are looking to. I see a comment here. I don't understand why people demonize small landlords. You're absolutely right. The narrative needs to change, because you're actually demonized as a landlord. You're kind of like, I see the comments in TikTok and stuff like that, and it's like accusing me of being a bloodsucker because I'm a landlord. And it's kind of like, hold on a second. To the person who's trying to rent a property, I provide a service. And like, that's just the way it works. Like, I mean, some people want to rent, some people want to buy. I just don't understand that. If you go to other markets like Germany or, France or even the UK, you're not viewed as a bloodsucker in that sort of way. So anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a rant there. I'll bring it back. The government introduced this change to the RPZs, and what it means now is that instead of the 2% cap, what you have, well, first of all, instead of, I think it's like 27 or something like that, towns and villages around Ireland were within the RPZ. Now the entire country, every single town, village, whatever it is, everything all falls under the RPZ. So that's a big change. And that was very, very unusual and unexpected, because there was talk about the RPZ being abolished. And I talked about it, I think, on this similar live stream not so long ago. There was talk about it being abolished. And all of a sudden, no, we're not going to abolish it. We're going to do a complete 180. We're actually going to extend it across the entire country. So a lot of landlords taken by surprise there. And My friend in the Irish Property Owners Association, Mary Conway, said like they were caught completely blindsided in this way. So crazy stuff. There was also talk about tax breaks. It remains to be seen if there's going to be any tax breaks. But I look at the situation now. Every single property in the country is now under an RPZ, first of all. Second of all, what have they introduced? Okay, so 2% cap is now still there, but at the end of a 6-year period. So from the 1st of March next year, 2026, that will be a cutoff point. And from that point on, any lease that starts on that date will have 6 years of guaranteed tenancy. So you will not be able to remove a tenant because you've changed your mind and you don't like being a landlord anymore and you want to sell your property. You can't get the tenant out. You will have to leave them in for 6 years. Now, what's this going to mean? Well, two things. First of all, for a tenant, I guess it's a good thing because a tenant can now enjoy having a property with some sort of tenure and some sort of, they know that they're going to be there for 6 years. That's a good thing. The bad thing about it, though, is that for a landlord who is thinking about, not sure whether they want to lock in a 6-year contract with a tenant, all of a sudden there's going to be a little bit of trepidation there and uncertainty. And if you're a person who's not sure whether you like the idea of being locked into a property for 6 years, now you might say, oh, we could just sell it. Well, you can't sell it with vacant possession anymore. You're going to have to sell it with the tenant in situ. And if anyone who's been selling property in the last couple of years, if you were a landlord and you decide to sell your property, and when you sell your property, what is the first thing that you're asked? Please, can we have it with vacant possession? Nobody wants to buy a place with a sitting tenant for a couple of reasons. First of all, the biggest reason is that the people who are buying because they want to move into that property themselves. They've got mortgage approval and that's the house they want to buy. They want to move in and they want their kids to go to the local school and all that. So that's the first thing. But second of all, if you are a landlord and you're thinking, I'm going to buy this property, I don't know whether the landlord that I'm purchasing from carried out the same level of due diligence and all that stuff as I do. And maybe this is a nightmare tenant. I don't know. So I would rather not inherit that. I would rather just buy the place and then find a tenant myself. So what does that mean now? There's 6 years guaranteed tenancy for tenants. That means that most landlords who aren't comfortable with the idea of being locked in for at least 6 more years are going to say, I got to get out. I got to get out now. And that's what's actually happening. I'm hearing anecdotal evidence from various people. They're saying that landlords are, evicting or giving eviction notices left, right, and center at the moment, just because they're scared. They're worried about these changes. They don't know what it means for them. They don't know whether their property prices are going to fall because now you're committed to 6 years with a tenant. I can understand why the government would do that, because a tenant living in a property, they want to have that certainty that they're not going to be evicted in the next kind of year or two just because the landlord feels like it. But on the other hand, now think about it from the landlord's perspective. Now, here's a scenario that's interesting. If you were to inherit a property, let's say that your parents owned a rental property and the parents leave you that rental property in their will, and they, somebody dies or whatever, and you say, okay, I've just inherited a rental property. Good. Now, how do you pay the tax on that? Whenever you inherit something, you're entitled to a certain amount tax-free, but after and above that, you pay 35% inheritance tax. So if you've got an inheritance tax bill to pay, and sometimes people might have 100,000 and they have to find it somehow, where are you going to find it from? Because you try to sell that property, who's going to buy it? Because it won't be an owner occupier looking to move into the property, because they are going to have to buy it with a sitting tenant. So you can't sell it except to sell it to another landlord. And that's the bit. Are enough landlords going to be in the market buying? So yeah, 6 years. Somebody's saying, wait, what?
This is vastly exaggerated. Well, I don't think so. I mean, feel free to let me know if you think it's exaggerated, but I've been reading about this and I've been doing research on it. So you just have to ask yourself what, the rules are, the policy changes, 2% cap stays in place for existing tenancies. Market rents allow for a reset every 6 years, and if the tenant leaves voluntarily. So what that means is that you get somebody, they move in, it takes 6 years, they have only 2% a year annual increases. But if the property market has kind of run away in that time period, and there is a big gap between you and your next door neighbor, you'll be able to bring it up to that higher level at the end of the 6 years. But you're going to have to live with the property for that 6-year period. Some people will not be happy at the idea of being locked in on that. Now, the other thing is that new builds, and this is, I guess, the big reason for the changes, is to try to get the big funds back into the market, because there's been a big drop in the number of them that have actually come into the market. The big funds, and I'm talking about like funds from Germany and France, like pension funds, they have billions and billions, and what they are looking for is stable investments that will give them a return over a period of like 20 years or whatever. So they come into somewhere like Ireland and they say, oh yes, let's go and buy here. We can buy a block of 200 apartments. And at the end of the 200 apartment, at the end of the life, they'll just kind of keep on collecting income for all that period of time. But they need to see that the income can increase at least the level of inflation, so that their money can maintain its value. If you make them go below inflation, so at the 2% cap is the maximum, and if inflation was at 4 or 5%, you're not allowed to go above 2%. Now, that's a big concern for the big funds. So the big funds pulled out and they stopped investing in the market here. And so the government is trying to get them back, and by basically doing this new thing where all new units will not be underneath this, will not be under this rule. So that's going to be one of the benefits, I guess. And so the big apartment schemes may get started again. But as I mentioned earlier, the big funds, they only control about 6 to 8% of the rental market. The rental market is 130,000 homes are owned by landlords of 1 to 2 properties. The big funds control only 6 or 8% of the market. Now, in the Dublin area, they have a massive footprint because they don't tend to invest outside of Dublin. So the big funds have probably 25 to 30,000 apartments in the Dublin area. But those guys, they'll continue investing in Dublin. They're probably not going to invest outside of Dublin. And that being the case, what's going to happen to rental property up and down the country where these restrictions are in place? So you still have to kind of wonder about that. Now, let me have a look at some of the questions here. You can still gain possession by selling the property if you own less than 4 properties. It won't affect the 86. Yeah, but there's, well, Dublin City Rentals. Okay, you probably know a little bit more about this than me. I just know what I've been hearing from the people that are inside of the groups that I'm a part of. And the groups that I'm a part of, a lot of people are just wary that whereas they may not be directly impacted, it could impact the market itself, and that it could actually just drive more people out of the market. If they drive people out of the market, I suppose the benefit of it is that it pushes up rents because there's fewer properties on the market for sale, or for rent, I should say. We've got to also look at what's happening with the ECB. So the European Central Bank cut its rates in June, and we're now down. Mortgages are now sort of coming down, and it looks like that trajectory is going to continue. So that's a good thing. But Ireland is still among the top 5 most expensive markets in the Eurozone for mortgages. First-time buyers, they're still very strong in the market. That is obviously because there's the grant, the first-time buyers grant and stuff like that. But there's about 26,000 people bought properties that were new first-time buyers in 2024. It's the highest number since back in 2007. And movers struggle. Movers are struggling, right? We are down 20% versus the numbers that were taking place pre-COVID. And then the new mortgage average today is 320,000. Now the new mortgage average, 320, the average house price is now 400,000. That's the average across the country. So it's interesting. Just 80% of buyers are on fixed rates. So these are things to think about. The national prices are up 7.5 year on year. In Dublin, we're up actually about 6%, but the rest of the country is up 8%. That's still, prices are still going up and up and up. And there's just a shortage. You cannot build enough properties. And if you look at the number of people that are talking about planning as a major issue, getting planning permission is so difficult to do. It takes so much time. If you go into any other market, you will find a much, much quicker and a much, much more efficient market. Here in Ireland, it's supposed to take 8 to 12 weeks, but I don't know very many people who have achieved a planning permission in that time period. And if you're doing anything that's large scale, you're into months, if not years, to get planning. And there's a huge cost to that too. One of the biggest issues with planning is that you actually have to allow anybody, anywhere, to submit an opinion on your development, on your proposal. And those people can just can actually slow you down. So I've heard a case recently of a lady that lives 30 kilometers away from the development, objecting to something and holding up the whole development. And the development was something like 600 apartments. So you kind of think to yourself, that's crazy. Why can somebody 30 kilometers away object to something? It would be maybe different if you were the adjoining property owner or something like that. But it's quite different when you look at it like this. So there is most definitely an issue there. Now, we also have a growing problem with the trades. If you speak to the average person who's in the trades, so plumbers, carpenters, electricians and stuff, the average age is getting much, much older. Jason, good to see you. The average age of a person that is in the trades is now about 45 years of age. So if you're 45 years of age, how many more years do you want to spend on a building site doing your business? Where are all the 20-year-olds? It used to be that people would leave school at the age of 14 and 15, then they would join their dad or their uncle as an apprentice, and that was a legitimate way to go. Those numbers now are really, really low in comparison to the way it used to be. And so what it means is that there's just very, very few trades on building sites. And if you take that to its logical conclusion, in the next 10 years, there's going to be a major shortage, and it's going to get even worse. So anyway, a lot of people are saying they're all in Australia. Yeah, that's a good point. So there's another thing that is worth, now we were talking about whether the market is going to crash, and there's a thing that I spoke about on social media not so long ago, and it got a huge receipt or a huge number of people commented and stuff like that. And it is the concept of the 18-year property cycle. And I wanted to just talk about the 18-year property cycle for a second. So when I remember somebody wrote this to me, they said, hey, what do you think of the idea of the 18-year property cycle? And I remember kind of thinking, that's a load of bullshit. There's no way that the world will just align to fit within this 18-year cycle. But what's strange is if you go back over the last 30 years, you can actually see the 18-year property cycle playing out twice, and it almost perfectly fits this this framework. And so it's kind of unusual. So if we look at 1990 to 1994, there was a huge crash with the currency crisis. In the 1990s, there was a currency crisis. And I can remember overnight interest rates shot up to 60% or something at one stage.
Sorry, Could you say that again?
Siri wants to have a word. So what happened anyway is that had a massive impact and people in the UK were particularly impacted by this. Housing market collapsed in the UK, and there was a couple of years. These crashes, they tend to go, when a crash takes place, it tends to last about 4 years. So there's the first start of the crash, and prices will collapse for at least a 4-year period. That happened in 1990, and up until about 1994 was the crash when prices were falling. Now, 1994, this is around about the time that I was actually in university studying. And I can remember suddenly the property market was actually on its way back. And I can remember prices were going up regularly and that there was a rebound in the market. So that rebound went from 1994 to about 2001. That rebound is when the market is rebounding. There's a 7-year period when the market rebounds. And at the end of that 7-year period, it goes from a rebound into an overheat. And so there's usually a 7-year period of overheating. And so what you'll actually find is 4 years of crash, 7 years of rebound, 7 more years of overheating. And going back to the numbers, in 2001, that's when the overheating began. And I can verify this because I was in the middle of all that. And I can remember property prices were rising at 25% per year. It was absolutely chaos, and it was fantastic. I was making millions back in those days, and it was really easy to make very quick money. And the problem is that everybody started to jump into the property market. I can remember people that were not property investors becoming property investors because it looked so easy. And I have friends that were solicitors, and solicitors, they work long hours, they get paid well, but they stockpile cash and they put it into stocks and shares and all. Suddenly they were getting into property deals, and they were, all of this was happening all over the place, and it was an overheating of the market. And I can remember clearly at one point, I recognized that there was an overheating going on here. I remember looking at some deals, and I can remember thinking to myself, this makes no sense. Like the price we'd have to pay for this site to make it work, that we'd have to sell each unit at this like exorbitant rate. And I can remember just thinking to myself, I don't see any value anymore, so I'm going to look abroad. And that was the mistake I made as I looked abroad. Now, 2008 was the crash. Lehman Brothers came collapsing. And when that happened, it doesn't just happen in one day and that's it, like the prices drop. It takes a couple of years because people don't accept that they've lost everything for a couple of years. There's a thing called capitulation. And in 2008, suddenly it all started, and banks started to collapse, and banks started to get sold to other banks, and all this stuff was going on. And then you suddenly had people told by the bank manager, you need to repay that loan. And the guy be like, what do you mean I need to repay the loan? I'll just pay the interest. And he's like, no, the value has fallen. We want you to repay the loan. And suddenly people are in, no, I'm not going to do that. And there's a bit of an argy-bargy, and it takes a period of time for the banks to go after you, to take over your property, and to do all these kind of things. And that's what was happening there. So from 2008 to 2012, there's this kind of falling of property values. And I can remember in that time period, most people refused to accept it. And what they do is they got and I was in this position. I had a really beautiful home that was valued at, a large price. And I can remember somebody came along and offered me like what I deemed to be an insult of a price. And I said, no way. And I told the person to F off, because it was insulted by this low price. Sure enough, a year later, I'm still trying to sell the house. And that low price I was offered, I would have given my right arm for that price. Suddenly, you've fallen below that price. And now you're regretting that you didn't accept it. But you don't accept that you actually have to go even lower. And so the new reset level is maybe substantially below where your mindset's at. So you keep on chasing the deal and the price down. That's what happened. So from 2008 to 2012, that was the crash. And that was when all of the prices collapsed. And the best time to buy was around 2012, 2013, 2014. That's when the prices were on the floor. And that was the time when the rebound began. If you bought at 2003, 2004, around that time, or 2013, 2012 and 2013, you were going to do incredibly well. And the government even introduced a CGT holiday. That was the capital gains tax holiday. So if you made a fortune buying it at that low price, you wouldn't pay any capital gains tax. You had a holiday, but you had to hold on to the property for a minimum of 7 years to be eligible for it. Anyway, 2012 came along, everyone started buying, but it was a slow rebuild because why? Well, the banks were the stumbling block. The banks were so burnt from the crash that they were very, very conservative. They still are, but they were particularly so. So it was almost impossible to get money to do deals. And so along came some private investors. And there was one particular guy that came in. Guy from the US came in, set up Lotus Investments, and they were offering money at like 18% interest. And there was guys paying them 18% interest because you could get deals that were such good value that it made sense to even to pay 18%. It made total sense. So that's what happened from 2012 to 2019. Now, what happened in 2019? That's when we moved from rebound into starting to overheat. Now, this is somewhat complicated by the fact that COVID came in the middle of all this. And what happened was COVID, first of all, everyone was nervous. There was no action and no activity in the market for a weird period of time. And then what happened was we came out of it and there was all these shortages. And of course, that pushed prices up. And so now what we are is we're in the 2019 to 2026 overheat period, according to the 18-year concept. And does that mean that 2026 is going to be the year when it all comes crashing down? We shall have to wait and see. But there would be a few people out there that would think that that doesn't sound too far-fetched, because look at what's going on. Donald Trump, war in Iran and Israel now. You've got what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. Like all of this uncertainty, instability, you just kind of wonder whether that's going to bleed into international finance. And you're going to have people out there saying, you know what, I'm not going to make that investment. I'm just going to hold back. So love to know what you guys think. I'm going to start handling some questions now. Do you think the money from landlords that want to walk away ends up in stocks? That's a good question. One of the things I'm conscious of is the fact that a lot of the people that I speak to and will say, you know, carpenters, plumbers, anyone who's in the trades, anyone who's like a builder and stuff, they tend to feel far more comfortable owning a property than they do owning stocks. They tend to feel like that you can touch and feel a property, like you can rent it out, you can do something with it, you can take it over, you can improve it, you can extend it, you can do all that kind of stuff. But put your money into the stock market, like that's kind of feels like a lottery to some people. So you have to kind of wonder, will they go and put their money? What I think is possibly more likely to happen is they park it in their bank account and they think, let's wait until we find something else to invest in. Maybe it's a foreign property. I know some people are looking in the UK and stuff like that. So I know some guys inside of my mastermind are looking at the UK and they're buying there and they're finding good value there. And it's also much easier to finance stuff there. So there's a bit of that. So anyway, it's hard to kind of say. Opinion on BidX1. There seems to be a lot of good value. Yeah, I mean, the thing about BidX1 is, first of all, you can't buy on BidX1 if you need mortgage approval. As far as I'm aware, BidX1 requires you to be a cash buyer. So if you're a cash buyer, then you probably are going to always find a little bit more value than if you're a person who's bidding against other people and everyone has to go off and ask the bank. What do you think about buying on BidX1? Fixing the issue, tenant legal, then putting it back on the market to those with mortgages? Yes. So there is actually a guy inside of my accelerator program, and he has done exactly that. He went and he bought, I think he bought it on BidX1. He bought a ghost estate. And those of you who don't know what the ghost estate is, back in 2007, or in 2008, when there was a big crash, what happened was the banks pulled the plug and stopped giving any money to anybody. And so there was actually housing developments that were, like 30, 40 apartments or whatever. And they were fully built, we'll say like 90% built. And all of a sudden the banks say, you're not getting any more money. And there was no way of completing the development. And so all of a sudden, do I do private consultation? Yes, I do. If you go into my website, I'll drop a link in there shortly to do that. Let me just capture your. So anyway, getting back to this ghost estate. The ghost estate, this guy bought this ghost estate. He bought, I think it was 40 apartments for 1.5 million. So do the maths on that. That's like getting them at an absolute bargain. And they were in very, very poor condition. They had been bought out by a fund, like one of these vulture funds. And the vulture fund took over the loan and got rid of the owner. The owner had gone bust or whatever. So this was just a debt, a loan that was basically there, was bought by this fund. And then they sold off these 40 apartments to somebody. My friend in the group came along. He was able to get the money together. He bought it. And in the process of buying that, he picked up 40 apartments at 1.5 million, all boarded up, like not even having windows in some cases. So they had like metal sheets and stuff on over the windows. Went and spent about 7 years. Now it's not an overnight turnaround. Some of these things can take time. He spent about 7 years rectifying the title, because what had happened was the builder that had gone bust had already pre-sold a number of units. And so he had signed agreements with people to sell the properties. Now, but of course, what happened was he went bust. So the people that were left, they had paid a deposit to the company that went bust, and they still had a contract, but they themselves didn't want to go ahead because they were overpaying for the properties that they had agreed to buy. So you had the builder's gone. He's not even in the picture anymore. And then you have these contracts that are still alive, but the person who signed the contract wants to know nothing about it. And so my friend went and approached these guys and said, listen, you have this contract. And a lot of them were like hanging up the phone. They don't want to hear from him because they think he's coming for the money. And he'd say, no, listen, you don't understand. If you want, I can let you out of this contract. I just need you to sign this basically release, and that's it. And they're like, how much do you want us to pay? And he goes, no, I'll give you €1,000 to do that. And they're like, oh, thank God. And that's what he did. So he managed to do it. Now it took quite a few years. You're tracking people down often. Like people move away. The bank didn't have any information. They had the original information, but they didn't have the information afterwards. So all of a sudden you have a situation where you're trying to track down a person. Maybe that person died. Maybe they left the property to a relative. Maybe the relative lives in the UK. This guy was like tracking down. He had employed like a detective to go and try and find some of these people. Anyway, it was worth doing because he's managed to clean up the entire thing. And the property is now worth about 4.5 million. So there's the kind of upside that you can see if you go down, but it's not easy. It can take quite a bit of work to do that. But it gives you just some example of what's possible. Let's have a look at some of the questions that have come in the last while. So going down through the questions. Thoughts on buying bid X1, overcoming tenant issues, legal issues, then reselling on it to the market. I think that's the same person here by the sounds of it. So I'll keep on going. Can you get below market properties? Yes. So one of the things that it's important to remember, okay, so a lot of people out there would say there's no value, but that is also a mindset. And you've got to be very careful that you don't convince yourself that there is just no value to be found. There is value, it's just there's not a lot of it. So you might go out there and you might make an offer. Maybe it's a cheeky offer that you make to somebody. And in the making of that cheeky offer, 9 out of 10 times you'll get somebody telling you to get lost and like don't even dream about making an offer like that. But the 1 out of 10 times you might find that it's somebody that needs that money for something else. And you might be thinking, oh, aren't you taking advantage of someone's misfortune? No, we were just talking about this earlier. It's not always misfortune. You might have somebody that has another opportunity that he's going to do really, really well on, but he can't get into it unless he frees up this money that he needs. So he's asking for $450 for something. You come along and you say, I'll give you $250. And if there's no other offers on the table, he might just accept it. Now, a lot of people will gripe and complain and everything like that. But if he's got another opportunity to jump into and he needs to operate quickly, then that's what's going to happen. So that's one example of how you can actually make an offer. And even if somebody's asking for $450, you just put in a cheeky offer. 9 out of 10 times you'll be told 2 fingers, but that one time you might actually get it. We need to remember 2008 crippled the country. Why do it all over again? Well, I think the country is in better shape now than it was. If you go back to 2008, the biggest problem with the country was that the banks were on this kind of lending spree. And the only thing they were interested in doing was making profits for their shareholders, in which case they would get huge, big, fat bonuses. So the banks were competing with other banks, and it was a kind of a battle downwards. It was who can get the lowest common denominator, who can like sell the most loans to the most people, and the quickest way to do that is to reduce your due diligence, to make it much, much easier to loan people money. And so that's what actually happened. So the whole idea of doing credit committees and all this kind of stuff, that kind of went out the window. And it was just, look, just give them the money, like we'll get fees for this. And so that's what was happening in 2005, 6, and 7. And when that was happening, the banks were making record profits. The CEOs were taking home record bonuses. But what happened was it was all lent on, it was all kind of like a house of cards. And what happened in the end was, obviously, most people know, is when these loans, what happened was in the US, it all began in the US. The loans were all packaged up together and sold to funds. And the funds were buying these. And the funds were buying them thinking that these were like grade A investments, when what they were was a whole load of mortgages all jumbled together, including all these really cheaply put together ones that didn't have good fundamentals. And this is where the term dinky came out. A dinky mortgage was a double income, no kids. That was a good, that was a good deal to go and do. If you could find somebody that had a wife and husband with no kids, that was a really good one. But then there was the other side, the ninja loan, no income, no job. And that was the kind of thing that people were lending money. The banks were lending money to people with no income and no jobs. It was just, when you double the money on this property, you can sell it and you can pay us back the loan. That was the kind of mindset of the banks. So it became a credit bubble. And the reason that the country ended up in the difficulty that it was that all the banks got caught in this way. And when the banks got caught in this way, the government had to step in and take over the banks, or else there was going to be a collapse of the banking system. And the collapse of the banking system would have been worse because it would have affected jobs and it would have affected the wider economy. Like whatever about the property market going down and whatever about the construction market going down, if the wider economy is impacted, that's a really bad thing. So biggest problem for landlords for this is the tenants decide not to pay. We have no way of removing. Yeah, well, that's a big problem in the Irish market. You've got the RTB, the Residential Tenancy Board, and the RTB, the big complaint that I'm hearing from most people that are having to deal with it is that they're not adequately resourced. So there's a huge backlog. So if you need to go and get a property, a tenant evicted that stopped paying you rent, it can be 6, 12, 18 months until you have that person out. And this is one of the big issues, that that is forcing a lot of landlords to just give up and say, do you know what, I couldn't be bothered. I don't need this kind of grief in my life. The problem is you have to get the tenant out in order to sell the property. So they have to go through all of that grief, which can take 18 months. The stress of it's terrible. And at the end of the 18 months, the thought of getting caught again is just too much. And most people just put it on the market and just sell it. And that's, somebody says here, I've got a commercial property for 145K all in. I have a tenant willing to pay 3,200 and sign a 6-year lease. When the lease is signed, would it be worth it for me to sell or to keep? Well, 3,000 is that pay 3,000 a month is a pretty good return. Like that's sounds like it looks like a good return there. So might be. I mean, I'm not going to do the maths here on online, but it does look like a decent enough return if it's 3,200 per month. Now, if it's per year, then walk away. Do you think I should buy a home under the tenant incremental incentive scheme? I'm eligible, pretty sure it's a 40% discount, or should I save up for a new build? Like the thing is it's very difficult to answer questions like that without more context. It's one thing, like certain people it's a no-brainer. For other people, it all depends on your circumstance. It's very hard to answer a question like that in a setting like this where we're not having a conversation. Would you be doing B or if so, what way would you do it? Okay, so B or for those of you who don't know, that's buy, refurbish, rent, and then you get in the paused because you weren't using the app. I'm using the app. In the case of B or, so buy, refurbish, rent, and then refinance. That's what it stands for. And what you do there is you find, let's say, a fixer-upper. And you find the property, it's in poor state of, you do it up, you buy it first of all for a cheap price. That's the first step. Make sure you're buying it for a cheap price. You do it up you refurbish the property. A refurbishment will add value above the amount that you spent on it if you do it in a wise and thoughtful way. A lot of the time people will put in new bathrooms and a new kitchen, but you don't have to go and get the best kitchen or the best bathrooms. You just go and modernize it and the place will look twice as good as it did. Repaint, decorate, maybe new carpets, whatever you need to do. You put that place on the market for rent. You rent it out. When that property is rented, then you go to a bank and you say, I'd like to refinance this. And the bank will send a valuer along, and the valuer comes into the property, has a look around, sees it's all decorated, sees it's in nice condition, sees that it is rented to somebody, sees the rent coming in on the bank statement, and goes, this looks like a good investment. This property is worth X. It should be worth substantially more than you paid for both the property and the refurbishment. You should have like a big upside there. And in some cases, like I know guys inside my group, they've seen an upside of maybe 150,000 in value above what they put into it. And so you go to the bank and you say, I have this property I'd like to refinance. And the bank look at it and say, oh, you have 150 grand of equity here. Oh, well, then we're willing to go and give you back some of that. So you take some of that back out and that goes into the next deal, but you keep the property. Now, there's a couple of things that you need to be careful if you're going to do that. You got to make sure that whatever you're doing, you are aware of what's the maximum price you can achieve on that street. So some people think, oh, I'll go and spend like a load of money and I'll just sell I'll refinance the property after I've done the job. But if the property in that area, if the maximum price, let's just use an example. Let's say the maximum you can achieve in that street is 400 grand. Let's say no property has ever achieved more than 400 grand and you're able to buy the property at 250. If you can buy it because it's in poor condition, maybe the back garden's all overgrown and stuff like that, you can go in there, pay 250, and maybe you spend 75 grand redoing the back garden, redoing the house. So you're out of pocket about 325K, and then you go and revalue it. That sounds like a good deal because you're likely to get it up to the 400 and you're going to make that profit of 75. But if you get it wrong, and if you've spent more money, if you spend 200 grand doing it up, then your actual outlay is now 450 and the maximum house on that street has been achieved at 400. So you're above the maximum. And it's quite possible that a valuer will come around from a bank, he will check the other properties and he will say, it's only worth 400. And you'll be saying, but hold on, I'm just after spending 450. That doesn't matter. It's what the prices in the area have achieved. That's what they look to. And they won't give you a special deal because you spent, this extra money. So BRR is definitely going to, but just the guys that I'm working with inside my group, I have a mastermind group, and I have for beginners, I have a foundation course, and for the guys that are looking to replace their income from their job with property income, I have the accelerator. So if anyone's interested, send me a DM after this live, and I'll send you on the details. So let's go. Do a lot of companies and contractors still manually process invoices in 2025? I have no idea. Okay. I don't know about other people, but that's not really a property question. I'm going to go now to, let's have a look. Some of the comments that we have. TikTok, it's funny, like I get so many more comments in TikTok than I do in any other platform. It's like I have to go back over hundreds of comments. It's always amazing. So we're going to go back and let's have a look. Yeah, so I remember seeing this comment. Why do people demonize small landlords? Okay, so the next question was, everyone thinks landlords are minted, but can be a problem like roof repairs, new shower, etc. Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people actually, the big problem that landlords make, if you're starting out, and this is one of the things that I would be covering in my foundations course for beginners, is that when you're buying a property, you got to be very, very careful around the economics of it. You're going to be paying interest back to the bank, and then you've got a leftover amount. That leftover amount, you also have to pay tax on that. And then you also have to save some of that for repairs and various things that can go wrong. So you've got to make sure that you're leaving enough, that there has to be enough of a margin there. So what we often do is we look for, we'll try to sort of earn at least a 10% yield on a property. And that means like if you're paying 300,000 for a property, then you would hope that you're achieving 30 grand a year in income. That would be a 10% yield. If it's below that, then it's getting tighter and tighter, and your costs are going to, you could find that you're actually having to put your hand into your own pocket and pay it out of other funds, not funds coming in. Is it hard to manage a commercial property, small retail? No, it's almost no management cost at all, no management involvement. Like if you do a proper commercial lease with somebody, usually it's an FRI lease, and that means full repair and insure. And that means that you don't have to do anything. Like you just get 4 checks a year and that's it. I have enough cash to buy my first house outright. Should I use it or use leverage? I would be inclined to use a little bit of leverage. Don't go crazy, but like you'll get up to, if you're buying your first house, you will get up to 90% mortgage from the bank. You see, it all depends on your situation. This is, again, when I'm giving advice to people, it's very hard, like without knowing a little bit more detail. But just to kind of take this thing, first time buyer has enough cash to buy the house outright. Should you use it or should you use leverage? Like you might sort of say, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to just own the house outright, not have a mortgage to worry about, all that. So you might be a person who's got a very secure job, in which case you're not that worried about paying a mortgage every month. Or you might be a person who works for yourself, in which case, there can be ups and downs in your income, and you kind of think, no, I'd like to just have no mortgage to worry about. And so it kind of depends on your circumstances. But what you might do as an alternative is go to the bank, get maybe 60% out, save 60% of your capital, and then put that into a property transaction instead, and instead have rental income coming in from that. So you end up with 2 properties. It's just a thought. Depends on your personal sort of desire to be a landlord, first of all, but also your knowledge, because a lot of people, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get yourself into trouble. You can make mistakes. Don't make it easy for us, that's for sure. How do you know how many landlords are left? Well, I know just from reading the RTBs, the RTB register, they talk about how many people are registered and stuff. So they have a lot of the numbers. How does that work? Okay, so I'm just how does that work through the grand rent can't be increased in 6 years? Yeah, no, you can increase your rent 2% a year, but that's the cap. But what happens is that as has happened in certainly in the Dublin area, is rents have risen at a greater level than 2%. So if you, let's say you built a house and you put it on the market for the first time, and there's a house next door that's been rented for the last couple of years, the house next door that's been rented for the last few years might only be getting 2,500 a month. But you, because you're not under any restrictions, because it's a new property that you're bringing to the market for the first time, you might put it out there and you might be able to achieve 3,500. So clearly the market has moved up to 3,500, but the adjoining property can only get 2,500. And if they want to increase that, they can only increase it by 2%. So it'll take them years to get up to 1,000 higher to match the adjoining property. So now this new rule will mean that after 6 years, they can rise up. And that's the idea of kind of allowing them to reset. But you can only do that at 6 years, or if the tenant leaves of their voluntarily. And that's something that is becoming more and more difficult. I speak to guys inside the group that have letting agencies and work in lettings and stuff, and they will tell you that if you ask somebody to move out of a property, it's not that they're being difficult. It's just that there is literally nothing to move into. So you're there saying, yes, I will move out as soon as I find another property, but I'm not going to become homeless so that you can have your property back. I'll continue paying you the rent. And so that's what happens. And you end up in a situation where the person, through no fault of their own, just cannot find. You might see there's photographs of a house for rent, and there's 30 or 40 people standing in the queue because they're all looking to rent it. And so it's like a beauty contest. The landlord sort of, which one will I choose? Let's go on for more questions. You can getting huge rents now. Don't see them leaving the market. Well, it depends. 6 years is a long wait, so somebody might need the money now. I have enough cash to. Oh yeah, sure. I've already gone through that. It's annoying the way this resets itself sometimes. Best investment for an 18-year-old. I would say the best investment is in your education. If you're 18 years of age and you're thinking about getting into investment, invest in your education. Now be careful what you invest in, because there's all sorts of charlatans out there that are selling get rich quick schemes and stuff. But if you understand the property market, like talking about real estate, if you understand the property market at the age of 18 and you start getting active and you know what to look for and all that, you're going to be minted by the time you're 38. And you might think that's a long way away, but believe me, 38 sounds like a great age. And so you got to think about that. And I do know, I know a guy that did exactly that, started buying at 18, and now he's only about 40 and he's absolutely minted. And he's doing really, really well. And that's just because consistently, time over time, kept on improving. And he knew what to do. He was smart. I'm looking to buy a property at the moment. €1,200 rental per month. Can set up a brand new? You got cut off, so I don't know what you were saying. Should I go through a broker for a mortgage, and who would I recommend? Yes, I think if you go through a broker, it means that you're getting the advice of somebody who is out there dealing with all of the banks, and so they will know who's good for the type of situation you're in. They'll be able to kind of coach you how to do it and all that. There's a person that I had on my podcast not so long ago, Margaret Barrett, and she's in mortgagenavigators.ie. And Margaret, she's great. A lot of the guys inside the group all think she's great. So I would definitely reach out to her. That's mortgagenavigators.ie. Okay, so Dublin City Round. Be sure to use the RTB calculator to find out what you're allowed to increase by. It's not a flat 2% rate. If you're caught doing this wrong, you, the landlord, have to repay every penny you've overcharged. Yeah, some great advice from Dublin City Rentals here. Thanks for that. Some more questions. Let's see. Anybody who has any sense has left the country. Okay, good positive vibes there. Okay, they're all in Australia. Yeah. Okay, so I'm catching up on. Did these cycles have a population size like ours, and is the shortage of rentals and houses to buy? No. So that's a very good point. If you go back to 2008, we were talking about how the country was nearly bankrupted by the last property crash. The reality is that was a credit bubble. And if you look at what actually happened there, first of all, the government wanted to incentivize certain areas of, well, like parts of the country, and they wanted to incentivize construction, and they wanted to incentivize development and things like that. So what they did is they introduced tax breaks. The tax breaks, there was things called Section 23, I think it was, Section 67. There was various tax breaks for different types of investments that you made. But a load of people got into buying apartments, and they would turn it into a rental property, and they would get back most of the construction cost would actually be recoverable, and then you'd be able to offset that against your tax bill. So this was a good thing. This actually caused loads of areas that were really in a poor condition, and they caused them to regenerate it. So the entire Temple Bar area. Those of you who are young won't know this, because Temple Bar is, a tourist hotspot. You go through it and it's very vibrant and all that. But when I was starting university in 1991, I used to have to walk through Temple Bar, and it was an absolute hole. There was nothing there. It was just a lot of derelict buildings. Everywhere you went, there was like buildings that were either derelict or they were flattened, and it was just like a flat lot that was just gravel. And I used to have to walk through that, and I can remember thinking to myself, God, this place is such a dump. And what happened was they introduced Section 23 tax relief, and all of a sudden, all those plots started to get built, and people started buying apartments right in Temple Bar, and suddenly it became this vibrant place. It took a couple of years now, but it was the same on the other side of the Liffey. I used to go to Bolton Street, DIT Bolton Street, and where there's a big cinema now, there's a big, huge cinema building there, and all that kind of stuff. That was just a huge, big, flat lot. They had demolished dozens of buildings, and it was just flat car park that could accommodate like 500 cars or something like that. The whole place was just derelict. And so they introduced these tax breaks. Then the banks started to see that they could make a lot of money lending to people. And then what happened was there was this boom. And what happened, and it's a lot of different factors that happened that kind of brought this all together. But we also joined the Eurozone. And when we joined the Eurozone, what happened was our interest rates, I can remember when we were in the Irish pound, our interest rate was around maybe 8% or something like that. And German interest rates were 2%. And so when we were joining the EU, the Euro, we suddenly went, hold on, interest rates are going to drop from where we are at 8% down to 2%. This is going to push up property prices. And so that got loads of people speculating, thinking prices are going to go up. So they all started piling in, and people made fortunes doing that. And then the banks just kept on getting, more and more confident. And so to say, everybody we lend money to, the property value doubles. And so we get back all of our money, and we have a client that is now rich, and so we can lend him more. And so it was this like cycle that just kept on going on and on and on. And it just got to the point where everyone was out of touch with reality, and got to the point where, I can remember a friend of mine was in, I think he was in Cannes. He was visiting Cannes, where the film festival takes place. And he was out on a boat one day, and they were pointing at all these amazing sort of waterfront developments in Cannes, overlooking the waterfront, and like all $1 million apartments and stuff. And he was saying, see that penthouse up there, that belongs to such and such a CEO of such and such a huge, company. And he paid 1.5 million for that penthouse. And my friend was on the boat, like this tourist kind of boat, going, 1.5? But sure, that's what Dublin prices are at the moment. Suddenly realized, whoa, like if CEOs are buying in Cannes at that price, and that's like become normal in Dublin, there's something wrong. So we lost the run of ourselves essentially, and then it all came crashing down when the Lehman Brothers collapse took place. Now, fast forward 15, 16, I think it's 17 years now since then, we're in a situation where there are now 1.5 million more people living in this country. And yet we have got half the capacity, construction capacity. In 2007, we built 85,000 housing units. This year, we are struggling to build 33,000 housing units. And everyone knows that we need between 50 and 80,000 housing units a year just to reach the equilibrium that we want to be at. So we are in really, really difficult situation. Like we're not going to be able to fix this. And that's why I get so frustrated when I see all of these people that are, talking about the planning system's perfectly fine and stuff. It's not perfectly fine. It's an absolute joke. It's so slow to get planning permission. Then the construction, we don't have the capacity. And then you've got all of these other issues that just kind of come out. Our building regulations are so stringent that an apartment costs about 400,000 per unit to build. If you go into central Dublin and you build an apartment that costs 400,000, you're okay because you can probably sell that apartment for 690 or something like that. So you'll make your profit. But if you go outside of Dublin, where the average price to build an apartment, to sell an apartment might be 350, you're looking at a situation where it costs you 400 grand to build the apartment, but you're still only going to get 350 for it. And so it's really, this is the problem. So it's going to be a major issue for people to overcome the housing crisis that we have. I'm in Ireland, yes. Looking to get into student accommodation for students, just wondering your thoughts. Okay, so student accommodation, it was a really, really hot area to get into. When I came back, I was in the UK. I was abroad for a couple of years and I came back in 2014. And I can remember arriving in just when student housing was a hot topic. I'd seen it in the UK. It was suddenly this kind of asset class that was very, very acceptable. A lot of investors in Ireland wouldn't touch student housing at the time, but suddenly they saw what was happening in the UK and they went, oh, wow, maybe it's actually a great investment. So I went back to Ireland and I started putting together student accommodation deals. And it was a really good time to do it. And then in the next couple of years after that, suddenly the big student accommodation funds caught on and they entered the market and they started buying up all the sites. And so it became difficult to make money as a developer doing student accommodation. If you're doing it on a small scale, the one thing that you have to think about is that you're not allowed to do 51-week contracts anymore. So one of the things that landlords doing student accommodation were doing was they were insisting that a student would have to sign a 51-week contract. So they have to pay for 51 weeks, even though they finish the term after 39 weeks or something like that. So they have to pay for the summer. And most people are thinking, no way, I don't want to pay for the summer months when I'm not going to be using it. So the government brought in some changes that meant that wasn't possible anymore. And there's been a bit of a backlash from the big student accommodation providers. They're saying like that this is not profitable anymore. But I know that the summer months are the difficult bit. You'll rent it very, very easily, but then you have to find somebody for the summer months. And a lot of the time, what people will do is they'll speak to language schools and things like that, or they'll turn it into like an Airbnb or something like that. So it might be worth your while looking at that. But definitely you have to build in the summer months when the thing. Do I see property prices cooling off next year? That is like the $1 million question. And when I started this live stream, that's exactly what I was covering. I was talking about, is there a potential for a crash? And I talked about the potential, a thing called the 18-year property cycle. And if you look at the 18-year property cycle, it would suggest that 2026 is the year that it all comes crashing down. Who's to say? But you definitely have a cyclical thing. Like property has always been and always will be a cyclical thing, and it'll go through a period of rising, then overheating, and then crashing, and then start again. The whole cycle starts. And the question is, when will that take place? And I think it's, my sneaking gut suspicion is that it could be close, but I could be completely wrong. It's just, the hairs in my nose tell me that something's going to happen. And primarily, why do I think that? Primarily because Donald Trump is in power in the US, and he's so unpredictable that I predict that he'll do something unpredictable, and he'll create chaos in the market or something like that. He could cause like some sort of banking collapse by doing something stupid, and just who knows. But also, he's now playing with fire, talking about bombing Iran and getting involved, and like it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of strategy going into the whole thing in Iran. It seems like it's more about who can look macho, and instead of like talking about a city of 10 million people, Tehran, sending tweets out that if I was living in Tehran, I would be evacuating. How do you evacuate 10 million people from a city? Like, what on earth is a guy in the president's seat making that kind of a statement? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think he's an unpredictable guy, and I think that would be the reason that could, like the tariffs is another thing that's created a huge amount of uncertainty in the market. And so I do think there could be a downturn. What are your thoughts on using Nestify for the first day? I have no idea about Nestify. What are your thoughts on Nestify? Let's keep going. Can you increase the rent after March 26th? Well, I think it depends on whether the person is in your property. But on the 1st of March next year, those rules come in that give people 6 years of tenancy rights. And I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of landlords are currently serving notice to evict their tenant, because they want to sell the property, and they don't want to have somebody locked in their house for the next 6 years. So that's what I'm hearing anyway. Keep on going. And do you think rent will just keep going up? I think it will. And the reason I say that is because there are fewer and fewer properties on the market because landlords are selling up and getting out. And you don't have, like, it depends. Like, if you look at, for example, the government was saying, oh, if we do these new changes, then there'll be more apartment developments built in the city centre. In Dublin, yes, there's 25 to 30,000 apartments in Dublin now, apparently. And there'll probably be thousands more built. But that's the Dublin market. What about everywhere else? That's not going to see increases in the amounts of property, I think. So guys, look, we're getting near wrapping up. It's I'm going to finish up at 9. Let's see. I'm going to see. Okay, bought a house for 310 and done it up. It's worth 500. Is there anything I can do? Are you sure it's worth 500? Because I mean, if it's worth 500, great. You've got a great you got a great job there. Is there anything I can do with it next? What you could do is just hang on to it and just see what happens with the market. Or if you want to go again, then you could release some money, possibly from an equity release with the bank or something. Very insightful. I hope prices don't drop. My reason being so many buyers now. Yeah, that's true. There's a huge amount of buyers there that are going to be in difficulty. But one of the things I will say is that this is not like 2008. We have got a situation where the banks, they run a lot of stress tests before they lend money. And I know from speaking with Margaret, the mortgage broker that I mentioned, Margaret was saying like that if you're going to borrow money from the bank, they will go back over 6 months of bank statements. And you'll get your mortgage approval, but they're still going to want to see your bank statements right up to the day of the purchase. And so one of the guys in my mastermind earlier this evening was saying that he got mortgage approval. He had been really good for 6 months. And then at the as soon as he got the letter with the approval, he said, okay, now. And he went and he took $5,000 out of his bank account and he went and he did something with it. And then the bank came along and said, can we have your bank statements again? And he's like, I already gave them to you. He said, oh yeah, we want to have an update. And he was like, and his mortgage broker went mad. It was like, what have you done? Like, they could turn you down now because of that. So you've got to be careful. They're going to really stress test you. And that being the case, I don't think people are as likely to get in the difficulty as it would have been in the past. Of course, if you overpay, you overpay. But I think it's more difficult now to get the money out of the bank without doing some stress testing on you. Are there any policies being put in place to increase the number of construction workers in various trades? Not that I can see. I think I think they really need to incentivize trades and construction workers. If you go and look at the problem in this country, is the capacity is just not there. But you go and ask somebody, do they want to work on a construction site? Do they want to, spend the winter months walking around scaffolding in the lashing rain and stuff? It's like it's a pretty unpopular job for the winter months. And so I remember seeing somebody comment on something. I talked about this on social media, and somebody said that it's not worth it. It's a horrible job in the winter months. If you can get a job in a nice cushy office, and if you look at some of the jobs like that, Google and Facebook and stuff, you got a nice office, you got foosball table, you got a snooker, you got food in these vending machines. It's like it's pretty comfy, Trust fund for kids over 18. Any advice? I don't really know. I mean, a trust fund for kids, probably a good idea, because kids of 18, a lot of the time, they don't have the wherewithal to know to do something good with their money. And if you have a load of money sitting in an account for an 18-year-old, there's a good chance they'll spend it all traveling or something like that instead of putting it into a property. Or you could do something stupid like buy a car or something like that. Lots of questions coming from different platforms. Yeah, that's why. Let me see. Population has never been as big. There's no property crash. Like that is a viewpoint there. That is called continuity bias. Yes, I agree. Population is very big. Yes, I agree. It doesn't look like there's going to be a property crash, but continuity bias is a very dangerous thing. And if you have that kind of a view, there's a chance that you'll get caught out. And I know I speak from experience because I got caught out. I did not think there was going to be a crash, and there was. What effect will war in Iran have on property? That's the big question I have. I think it's going to make investors more uncertain, and that's going to alter the sentiment, the market sentiment there. So who knows? It may not directly affect the property market here, but it could affect banking and lending from investors and stuff like that. Why is no one talking about Israel's nuclear program? I don't know about that. Do you think it's worth rechecking your mortgage contract signed in 2007? Do you think it will be worth it to recheck the mortgage contract signed 2000? Like, I don't know. Like, it could be, because what has happened is going back to 2007, huge number of shortcuts were taken. The banks were in such a rush to sell loans that they didn't do any homework at all. And a lot of the time, they've lost documents, they've lost title deeds, they've lost, like contracts. So you might have a contract, but your bank might not have a contract. Like things like that can happen. So you need to, but it's unlikely. But having said that, why not go and check it, Are you open to mentoring a person in their early 20s? We'd be happy to volunteer. I have a mentoring program. I don't do it for free because I just don't have the time. There's too many people asking for it. But what's your school community? Yeah, the school community is called Elite Property Community. And if you want to go online and check me out, there's gavinjgallagher.com or elitepropertyaccelerator.com. All right, guys, I'm going to wind it up there. Let me see. Final question. Putting a house up for rent, do you recommend furnishing it or not? Looking for a longer term? It's a good question. I think usually furnishing it, if it's longer term, then possibly unfurnished, because somebody could move into a place and they could have furniture moving with them. But usually speaking, you just have your own thing and somebody will just move in straight away very quickly. They're not going to be moving around with furniture. So I would say probably furnished is probably better. But you never know. Chance you're wrong. All right, guys, I hope you found this one useful. And I will see you same time next week. All right, take care. See you, everyone.